Good morning, everyone. Smile for a sec. Tavarish, smile. Now we can go home. That's fine. So let's start with the technicalities, and then we'll start with the most important thing in our workshop is Mazal Tov, because this is the most important thing. So are you getting married, Sania? No, just kidding. Okay. I just want to clear one thing. Where is it? Just a sec. Okay. If you look on the Word file that I've sent you, you'll see that there are different links. So the open session has one link, which is the first one. And then at 10 o'clock, we will go to two different panels. The first panel, Shai Egar, Benjamin, and Yael, we will stay in the same, we will use the same Zoom link. And the second panel will use Ira's link. This is the second panel. We'll use this link. So pay attention to the difference. At 11:30, we're going to have lunch. Each one will have his own lunch box. And at 12:30, the PhD MA students, and if any one of the scholars wants to join, there is the same link, which we would meet Professor Anne from 12:30 till 1:30. It's mainly for MA and PhD students, but you're all invited if you want. At 1:30, we will rejoin again, not to the first panel, because the first panel was recorded a week ago with the US guys, US women, Anat, Avia, and Daphna. And then it's the third link, which is the second and the last panel. So pay attention which link you're using. So from 1:30, we will have the second and the closing panel with the Dr. Lior Tzarfati new book. Okay? Got it? Okay. Now, let's do the most important thing, which I've waited almost a year to say these things. So before we start, okay, this is the first link, second link, which I explained a few seconds ago. Now, before we start, Mazal Tov and Toda, which is the most important thing in our Korean life. So let's start. First of all, I want to thank the Korean Embassy for its generous support. This is the fifth annual meeting of Korean Studies Workshop. It began about 5 years ago. It was my dream, and we were able to meet a bunch of Korean scholars, students, some of them thinking about MA, PhD at the Bar-Ilan University. And since then, for the last 5 years, we're meeting every year, having lunch together, dinner together, talking about Korean studies, and assisting the MA and PhD students to write their papers, to think, to get a positive criticism. My idea was to have a Korean family that is not threatening enough for the students to speak about their research without fearing they'll be criticized. As I said, we criticize. We criticize in a nice way. We say critics in a positive way. Okay, so let's start with the Mazal Tov to all the people. If I miss someone, I apologize in advance, but I'm doing my best. So Mazal Tov to Dr. Lior Tzarfati from Tel Aviv University for her tenure and her new book that she will talk about it in our last panel. So Mazal Tov, Lior, good job. Mazal Tov to Dr. Ira Lian Davari Shira, she's the new boss of Korean program at the Hebrew University. So pay attention and respect. Mazal tov to Jun Ri. She got a new job at Penn State University. She was at the Hebrew University and moved to the States. We wish her all the best. Mazal tov to Evgenia. She submitted her PhD and she published 2 articles. Mazal tov. It's difficult because we published 2 articles. Now we have to publish as well. So it's difficult. So Mazal tov. Hope our next workshop you'll be doctor, or maybe if you publish at least 100 articles per year, maybe you'll be a professor next year. Mazal tov to Tal Kaptor. She finished her MA under the supervision of Dr. Jean Ri and Dr. Orna Naftali from the Hebrew University. Mazal tov to Anat. She finished her MA under the supervision of Jean Ri, and she translated the book Almon to Hebrew, Shaked in Hebrew. She translated from Korean to Hebrew. We hope that once the corona will end, we will be able to read it in Hebrew, and some of you can read it in Korean or English if you want. Mazal tov to Benjamin for receiving the research fellow at the Department of East Asian Studies at Tel Aviv University. Last year you made Aliyah, so you don't get 2 Mazal tovs, if I'm right. Mazal tov to Uri Kaplan. He published an edited volume, and he translated another book to Hebrew, Mar'a el Masoret Hazen. It's important to focus not just on academic life, but on the general public as well, and he's doing a wonderful job as Mazal tov. Toda to Ira. She assisted in the translation of the AKS new book on Korea, that some of you will receive it. And Toda Rabba to the Korean Embassy. The Korean Embassy is doing its best to promote Korean studies in Israel, including translating Korean and English materials about Korea to Hebrew, so the general public can learn more about Korea. So as I said, thank you for participating. Hi, Guy. Boker tov. Welcome back. So, Korean Embassy. The floor is yours. If you want to say a few things about the.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Korean Embassy, I welcome you to the 5th Korean Studies Workshop. And thank you for your participation today and your long-time devotion to Korean studies. I'm very happy to be here today. This is my 3rd time at the workshop, and so most of the faces I see are familiar. Do you happen to know the Korean word 정? 정 means a feeling of warm, friendly affection you come to develop towards other people over time. I can tell you that I have this special feeling of 정 with you. This year, we have gone through troubled times because of coronavirus. But despite that, we have gathered here today as a Korean studies community to share our work and connect with each other. We embassy, including our ambassador, agree that you are the best friends we have got in Israel. We appreciate your work, your enthusiasm, and the valuable contribution you are making towards promoting understanding of Korea among the Israeli public, and also to improving relations between both the countries. Professor Alon often told me this is a very family-like community. so close-knitted that it's a family-like community. And I hope this family of Korean studies scholars in Israel will prosper in many, many years to come, both in quality and in quantity. I'm sorry that we can't meet this year because of Corona, but I hope we will have a family reunion next year in person, not instead of being online. Thank you for your participation once again. And I hope this community will prosper. And I wish each one of you great success with your career and good health too. And last of all, I wish you happy Hanukkah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. We have a few more minutes, so this is an opportunity. Some of the people are here. So can you present yourself, say a few words, so the other people that never met you can know who you are. So we'll start with the Ira and Benjamin. Can you present yourself, say a few words about yourself? Havarish?
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Alon who organized this workshop for the 5th year in a row. Thanks a lot. You are missing, to see you in person is very a missing experience for us. But anyway, for all who don't know me, my name is Ira Irina. I'm the new chair of Korean Studies in Jerusalem. It's a big honor for me, and I hope to take Korean Studies to the new place, better place in the near future. And I work on miracles, and especially in light of Hanukkah and Christmas. So we have like 2 miracles this month. I work on economic miracle and cultural miracle of South Korea. And who knows? Now we need just another miracle, to end the corona. So let's hope it will also be one of my researches soon. I pass.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Benjamin Ketzev-Silberstein. I'm actually finishing my PhD, hopefully within a few months at University of Pennsylvania. And I'm also working with Tel Aviv University a little bit now. And I want to take this opportunity to thank both Alon and Ira and everyone who organized this, and to what really feels like a genuine family of Korean studies here. Making Aliyah wasn't so hard because you get integrated into all these families very, very quickly, and I really, really appreciate that. So thank you.
How about your research?
Oh, sorry, I work on the history of surveillance in North Korea as my dissertation topic. So that's what I'll be talking about today.
Okay. Only the people according to my my screen. So Yael.
Hi, my name is Yael Bierman. I'm a PhD candidate, and my mentor is Guy. Hi, Guy. Which guy?
And now you have to say which guy. Which guy?
Which guy? Now I see there's 2 guys in the film, and my topic is promoting health by using traditional culture, traditional Korean culture in elementary schools. And I have a lot of issues about my other part of the research because I have to go to Korea, and this is a big and huge problem, but hopefully everything will be okay in the summertime. Hope so.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Sorry for being late for a few minutes. Yes, so I'm from the University of Haifa, and I do work on collective memory and sports history, sports nationalism, and these days my project is combining sports heritage, the way sports is being commemorated and constructed as part of Korea's collective memory. So again, it's very nice. Wonderful to have this event being a tradition here in Israel, and thank you, Alon, and thank you, the embassy, for not giving up with all those problems and issues that we're having, but keeping this tradition alive. For the Korean embassy, the fact that we are this time missing on a wonderful dinner, we'll remember it for next time. We're expecting 2 great dinners, so just don't cut on your costs, don't be so happy now, we'll remember everything. So I wish everyone a very good day today, and looking forward to hearing the presentations. Thanks.
I like the idea. We're going to have 2 dinners the same day.
One after the other.
And then we go to Yael for diet service. Shai.
אני?
שי יש רק אחת, אין
לא, שמעתי. Hi everyone, my name is Shai Yeger. I'm a PhD student from the University of Haifa. My supervisor is Dr. Podoler. I'm working on a study about the inter-Korean relations and the North Korean famine.
Evgenia.
Good morning, everyone, and it's so nice to see all of you again for the 5th time, even though this time this meeting is taking place online. My name is Evgenia Rosenfeld, and Alon, I'm sorry, but you did again this mistake with my family name. It's Z, it's not S. Please next time. It's okay. And thank you for Mazal Tov for congratulating me. I submitted my PhD thesis a few months ago. It was about culture, martial arts expansion, Korean and Japanese martial arts expansion worldwide. I work in general on the issues related to cultural expansion from 2 Asian countries, Japan and South Korea, and in particular on martial arts and Taekwondo as it concerns South Korea. Today I'll be talking about something else because I submitted my PhD thesis and now I can afford myself to a new topic. This is it, and thank you again. Thank you for this opportunity to present something new.
Dr. Park, can you present yourself?
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you. I was supposed to be here last week, but I was sick. I'm sorry about that. But I'm so glad that to be here. And I'm now postdoc fellow at Tel Aviv University. It's been just little more than 2 months in Tel Aviv. I already like the country and the weather and people. So I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to meet you. Those who didn't hear about my research, actually I talked to just before this started. So my research is about kind of Cold War domesticity in South Korea and looking at how urban family and women's housewives, economic and financial activities, and also the cultural practices that help them to kind of form the middle class identity and also that the formation of the middle class of the country. So I'm really looking forward to the presentations today. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to Israel. And you can come to Israel without doing Aliyah, but that's a different issue. Avia, you're next.
Hi. So I'm Avia. I am a PhD candidate at University of California, Riverside. Also, hopefully completing my PhD within a few months. Corona put a bit of it ruined my plans a little bit, but we're going to get back on track here. My area of study is I am comparative literature. I study Korean and Japanese literature. Those are my 2 countries. And my dissertation is on militarism and portrayals of soldiers and soldier-civilian relations in contemporary Korean, Japanese, and Israeli literature and media. I have a little bit. Complet gets to expand a bit, but that's my major interest. And I am very excited. This is my first time participating, so I'm very excited.
Well, in a way, it's your second time because we recorded last week. Yeah.
Yes, but it's kind of the same thing. So.
Yeah, no, just kidding. Now, we didn't want to wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, although you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to teach the people in the US. Guy Shababo.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Guy Shababo. I'm currently researching the post-Sewol events in social media with Lior Tzarfati, who's not here today. And happy to say that in a couple of months, I will be starting a postdoc in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, but in the Department of Communications, where I will be doing digital humanities. You
told us in advance so we can say Mazal Tov. But next
thank you. And so, yeah, my main research is on Korean intellectual history, focusing on Neo-Confucianism of later Joseon and how it influenced the 20th century as well. But today I will be presenting on something like one of my side projects, which is Confucian meditation that no one has heard of. I'm very excited.
Well, Mazal Tov for coming to the Hebrew University. Anat, you're next.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
My name is Anat. I just finished my MA in the Hebrew University. My topic of research was Ita June's Ita June's colonial literature short stories and the symbolism of women in these stories. I guess you all heard of their research in the previous workshop, so this time I will present something else. It's still under the category of an idea, but I would like you all to hear and comment on
it. Ksenia?
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you again. I'm Ksenia. I am an MA student in Tel Aviv University. I'm doing my master's under the supervision of Lior Tzarfati. And this is my 4th year participating in this workshop. Every year has been a challenge. And I'm researching Korean variety programs, specifically from the 1990s and to this day, and the globalization, Hallyu, and the cultural transfers between all this East Asian and the US regarding variety programs and television.
Toda. Lior, can you speak or you can't talk?
I can. I'll try to put also my... Yeah, the problem is I'm on campus and we have some connectivity issues from the morning and I barely managed to connect. So I apologize for taking the time and I might turn off the camera if it will break off, okay? But I'm here. So nice to meet everybody. The forum is growing and we're getting people from the US participating via Zoom. So it's really nice. And about myself something, my main research is about Korean shamanism. I'll be talking about it a little bit today. And my other project is about protest in Seoul. So the Sewol, Chamsa, the ferry accident protest, and most recently, a paper about Corona response that I wrote with the guy that he mentioned. So mainly anthropology and anthropology of the internet recently. I do that too.
It's simple, you like demonstrations.
That too. And ritual.
And in Seoul, it's wonderful. You have demonstration 24/7. It's difficult to pick which one you want to go. Forgot Maya Mordechai. She finished her MA, so Mazal Tov to Maya Mordechai. Apologies for not mentioning her. Only the Tel Aviv guys are clapping, so it's not. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so thank you for joining the opening session. Now, what we'll do is Ira will open the second link. The people who are participating in the first panel will stay here. we'll have fun. And the other people want to go to the second panel. We'll open the second link. The second link, as I said, this is for the second panel and the meeting with Professor Ann. And then at 1:30, after you finish your lunch and you finish your meeting with Professor Ann, you will come back to the second part of the workshop and the last part of the workshop with the Lior Tzarfati. So the presenters of the second panel can, first panel, stay here. The other one who want to join the second panel, please move to the other panel. Okay. Okay.
Hello?
Hello? Benjamin. Okay, we'll wait for a few seconds, and then we'll start. So the all the participants of this panel presented themselves, so there's no need to present themselves again. So each, we have an hour and a half. I hope, try to limit your talk for about 18 minutes, and then we'll have enough time to have a discussion. So according to the, okay, Shai, you're first. You can share your presentation if you want. If you have.
Yeah.
Okay.
רגע. טוב, יש לי פה קצת בעיה עם שני המסכים. טוב, זה לא נראה לי עובד, כי אני פשוט מחוברת פה עם כמה מסכים.
כמה מסכים? וואו, אנחנו... כן. מסך אחד.
רגע.
תפתחי את זה לא בידבור, אלא אל תגדי את המסך, לא נורא. ככה.
נשאיר אולי ככה?
כן, כן, leave it as it is. אוקיי. The clock is ticking. Go for it.
Okay, so every time that we have this workshop, I'm at the beginning of something. So right now I'm working on my first paper of my PhD that deals with the inter-Korean relations on the governmental level. In the following papers that I will write later on, I intend to add the layer of civil society in South Korea as well. My research basically deals with the inter-Korean relations and the North Korean famine during the 90s. Traditionally, the North Korean famine and inter-Korean relations have been studied as two separate domains. But my view is that these two subjects are very, very much connected together. So during the 90s, North Korea faced a severe humanitarian disaster. The main reasons were the collapse of the Soviet Union at the beginning of the 90s, and that was followed by economic crisis. The official position of the North Korean government was that the crisis was caused by floods in 1995. But there is evidence that indicates that the country has been experiencing a major famine with high mortality rates since 1994. The floods made the situation so bad that the North Korean government stepped out from the Juche self-reliance ideology and asked for assistance from the international community. One of the first countries to help was South Korea, who also became one of the biggest providers of aid. When countries share good relations, governments have no hesitation when they respond with aid. But the picture is more complex when it's two countries that doesn't share good relations, like the Koreas, or they are in a conflict. The reality of providing any kind of disaster assistance is in such situation is much more complex and must overcome many barriers, mostly political. So it is widely accepted now that disasters and politics are tightly connected. For this reason, some scholars define disaster as tipping points, watershed moments, or ripe moments, or just as opportunities. They argue that natural disasters can change the diplomatic environment in which they happened and also change the decision-making process in this new diplomatic environment. In some cases, natural disasters can have an impact even in the case of two conflicting states. One well-known example of this is Greece and Turkey. In 1999, earthquakes hit both countries and both of them offered help to one another, even though they are considered as old enemies. And this process of mutual aid was followed by diplomatic improvement. Based on this idea that disasters are powerful enough moments to have an impact on relations between parties to a conflict, a concept called disaster diplomacy was generated in the early 2000s. The concept of disaster diplomacy was originally designed to examine whether disasters positively affect relations among states that have been traditionally considered as enemies. So far, disaster diplomacy scholarship suggests that a disaster by itself cannot create diplomatic relations out of thin air, but it can encourage a political process that had a diplomatic foundation before the disaster. Now, disaster diplomacy scholars typically look for evidence that disaster-related diplomatic efforts can lead to reconciliation between two enemy states, and they often define it in terms of success or failure. So far, they didn't find any success stories, only failures. And when we look at first glance, when we look at the Korean case, it seems that disaster diplomacy failed again. The diplomatic base was already there when the famine happened, and we all know that the South Korean aid did not lead to the ending of the Korean conflict. But from my point of view, in some ways, it was a success. It did open up a new window of opportunity for inter-Korean cooperation within this complex diplomatic situation. In some ways, the famine added a certain layer to the inter-Korean relations, a new channel through which South Korea could be more active and push for dialogue with the North. This suggests that it might be more effective to examine disaster diplomacy as a process rather than a zero-sum game of success or failure. So my study builds on the idea that the North Korean crisis was a watershed moment or a tipping point in order to examine the issue of whether this disaster was politically transformative. And if so, how is this dynamic of change unfolded in the context of the Korean Peninsula using the framework of disaster diplomacy? The goal is not to discuss why South Korea gave aid, but to explore how it did it and how has this aid affected the relationship with the North, how Pyongyang reacted to it, and what happened after the famine ended. My aim is to place the North Korean famine in a wider perspective and explore the inter-Korean relations from a less explored point of view and to discuss the famine in a more macro level. This study offers a new approach to examine inter-Korean relations, as I said, and also a new disaster diplomacy case study that has not yet been investigated over the disaster diplomacy literature. The case study that I explore here is a case study over the long term, unlike other studies that were conducted only a few years or even months after the disaster. Finally, while most disaster diplomacy scholars focus on earthquakes or tsunamis, my paper discusses a new, different kind of disaster. Tsunamis and earthquakes are sudden and spontaneous event, and famines are prolonged man-made crises that carries a political character by nature, and so they have different outcomes and responses. So my research follows a case study design. I'm going to examine documents related to inter-Korean disaster-related activities, formal publications that cover foreign aid, such as the World Food Program, policy-relevant historical data, and Ministry of Unification publications regarding humanitarian assistance, and to the inter-Korean dialogue. The focus will be more on formal documents and formal publications. Now, this part of my materials is a little bit tricky because I was supposed to go to South Korea and look for all of this while I'm there. But my flight obviously was canceled and due to COVID, and now I need to use online materials and online connections that can help me gather my information. So I would argue that natural disasters can promote cooperation between conflicting states and inspire political steps towards better relations. The North Korean famine disaster created a new opportunity for inter-Korean cooperation, and that disaster diplomacy should be examined as a process, not as a zero-sum game of definite failure or success. I think, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can you? היי, תסגרי את המצגת.
כן, אני על זה, אני מסתבכת פה עם שני המסכים.
So, what I recommend that we do is we hear the three lectures, and then we can open the panel for discussion. So, Benjamin.
All right. Thank you. My first question is, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
And is the echo bothering you a lot?
No.
Good.
We can always mute you, so it wouldn't bother us.
Gotcha. I would like to share my screen.
Yeah, but you have to ask politely that Shai would allow you to.
Shai, something new.
מה, זה לא הצעה?
לא, זה לא הצעה.
אני לא יודע.
Okay, now, go for it. Now you can go.
Sorry.
Okay. Is it working now?
Yeah. Shalayo.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I actually want to start by asking you a question, just out of curiosity. How many people listening have heard the song 반갑습니다 by the 포천보 전차 음악단 North Korean pop group? I think 천 대표님, you might have heard it. No one? Okay, never mind. It's a North Korean pop song. It's like among people who have heard North Korean music, it tends to be the one that people have heard. And it's often played in like inter-Korean events and things like that, but it's actually about this ethnic Korean immigration from Japan to North Korea, which is what I'm going to be focusing on today. And so as I mentioned, my research focuses on the history of surveillance in North Korea. And this topic of, so basically what I'm focusing on here today is the impact that the ethnic Korean immigration from Japan to North Korea had on social control inside North Korea. And this was originally not part of my dissertation. But when I was doing interviews with North Korean defectors in South Korea, and we would talk about things like money in North Korea, like when did money and social and economic status start to matter, then so many people told me that this is something that happened when these ethnic Koreans immigrated. So then I figured this must be a much bigger topic than the current scholarship has understood. So just to give you a brief background of this, many of you are probably familiar with this part of North Korean history, but between 1958 and 1986, around a little over 94,000 ethnic Koreans from Japan immigrated to North Korea, because might say that they made aliyah to the Korean homeland. And actually a lot of the rhetoric around this and the propaganda from North Korea, it's very familiar to me as an Oleh Hadash in Israel. Like, this is sort of building the Jewish or the Korean homeland and things like that. Most of the ethnic Koreans in Japan were brought either forcibly or moved voluntarily to Japan for work during the colonial era. And they chose to move to North Korea during this time, mainly for socioeconomic reasons. They experienced a great deal of discrimination in Japan. Some would argue that that's still the case in Japan for Koreans. Okay, I'm sorry, I have to move. I was supposed to be in Ira's office, but she was on another panel, so I have to, and the guy just asked me to be quiet, so now I have to find another place to sit. I'm sorry. This is very annoying. I'm at the Hebrew U.
Alon, you are on mute.
Mute is the best. No one hears, so you can say whatever you want. Ben, you want to continue, or we'll move to the last speaker?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, the time. Only be quiet. No.
And you can always speak with mute.
I just told me I could come into the office. Yeah, currently. So sorry. Okay, here we go.
There are people at the Hebrew University. Wow.
Right. There's one guy, and the one guy happened to sit outside, inside his office where I was presenting outside. Right. So this is essentially why these tens of thousands of people decided to move to North Korea from a much wealthier Japan. On the North Korean side, they wanted skilled labor, and they wanted a propaganda victory, a huge propaganda victory to sort of be seen as the Korean homeland out of North and South Korea, because so many people chose to move to North Korea over South Korea. And this was a massive victory. And this is not new. Like, none of this is actually new in scholarship on North Korean history. But the main focus of most of the research has been on how this process happened on the Japanese side. And sort of the role of the Red Cross has been very, very heavily studied. There's a really good book called Exodus to North Korea by Tessa Mori Suzuki. But what I'm curious about is, how did these immigrants impact North Korea? Because that we actually know fairly little about. So this is, I mean, almost 100,000 people moving to a very close society. This obviously had a massive impact, but the question is, what was that impact? And it's interesting that, so I'm not sure how familiar you are with North Korea in the 1960s, but this is a time when things were getting harsher ideologically. There was a much, much stronger level of political control and oppression starting from sort of throughout the 1960s. That's the way that things went. So it's a very interesting time at which all these people arrived. And we also have to remember that a lot of these immigrants were able to bring things with them. They had much nicer clothes than the average North Korean. They brought with them refrigerators, home appliances, nice wristwatches, things like that, which the North Korean population just simply did not have access to. So I put I was thinking of using this as the headline for this chapter, Perfect Storm, because there's this combination of forces that in retrospect, it couldn't really have been anything but a disaster for the immigrants themselves. So I want to take a moment and just look at this picture here of one of the ships arriving to a port in North Korea. There's some witness testimonies from people who were on the ships saying that when they approached the port in North Korea, some of them thought that the crowds waiting and cheering them on and welcoming them, the local North Koreans, some people thought that they were beggars because they were dressed so poorly. And people were simply shocked at the state of poverty in North Korea because the propaganda that they had seen and that partially persuaded them to move, it said that living standards were good. The government provided you with clothes and work and sort of everything that you might need, nice apartments and everything. And then people realized often pretty abruptly that a lot of this just wasn't true. But what's interesting is also how the North Koreans that were waiting there on in the port, how they might have seen themselves. Because people that I interviewed, mostly North Koreans who were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. So they lived through the Korean War, most of them, and they lived through the 60s and 70s and 80s in North Korea. The 60s in particular was a time when North Korea was getting much wealthier. There was a great sense of progress and economic growth and sort of moving forward and building the country together at the time. So while the North Korean general population as a whole usually saw this as a time of progress, things were getting better, a lot of the immigrants from Japan arrived in North Korea and saw it as basically an impoverished country where people couldn't even dress properly. In retrospect, it seems like this sort of clash of two cultures, if you will, was almost inevitable. So I want to introduce an example of one person that I interviewed. It was very, very hard to find people who had themselves immigrated from Japan to North Korea and then made it out to South Korea. All my interviews I conducted in Seoul, I should mention, well, in South Korea, a few other places than Seoul, but never mind. This person, Kwak Chol-sam, it's a pseudonym because I promised everyone that I wouldn't reveal their real names. He's a very nationalistic, patriotic Korean patriot. And when I got to the apartment where he lived, he was busy reading books in Japanese and in Korean, and he was poring over newspapers from both countries. And when he told me about the time that he moved to North Korea in his youth, when he was in his early 20s, like he was very, very ideologically devoted. He wanted to make Aliyah to North Korea to build a socialist homeland. And I'm not sure if you've had this experience yourself, those of you who are from Israel, but I know that some Olim, you know, when we come here, we won't shut up about Zionism and things like that. And I imagine that it's a little similar when this guy comes to North Korea and all he wants to do is talk about Marx and Lenin. Because the thing is that totalitarian societies like North Korea, they tend not to favor people who are ideologically passionate because the ideology often clashes with the reality and the system. And this is what happened with Kwak Chol-sam in North Korea as well. He volunteered to go to a steel factory up in the northeast of North Korea because he wanted to be among the proletariat. But it was almost like it was not comical when he was telling me about it. But now the way I imagine it is he arrived at this factory and he told me that he had problems almost right away in connecting and relating to his colleagues because they were simply not interested in socialist ideology. He found them to be uneducated and uncultured. And he thought that they didn't really know anything about the world, which is probably true. And here comes this guy who all he wants to do is talk about Marx and Lenin and Victor Hugo and the Soviet Union, but people just didn't care. And again, this is a time when things in North Korea politically were centering increasingly around Kim Il-sung as a person, the North Korean leader at the time, and Kim Jong-un's grandfather. So North Korea was moving further and further away from socialism and from Marxist-Leninism. And this had Park very, very frustrated. So he actually tried to defect to the Soviet Union after only 1 year in North Korea, but he was arrested and placed under heavy surveillance for the rest of his life until he was able to escape. This actually happened to all the immigrants as a group eventually. They were all classified as objects for special surveillance according to the North Korean class ladder, so to speak. And their children and grandchildren end up in the same category. So I met quite a few people from North Korea who said that they were watched constantly trailed by someone from the security services simply because they happen to be ancestors of an immigrant from Japan. So what about the North Korean point of view? And I'm not talking about the North Korean state here. I'm talking about sort of the general public. So as I mentioned, my main argument of this chapter is that these immigrants impacted North Korean society as well, very, very significantly. And perhaps the most important thing that they introduced was a glimpse into the outside world and sort of the life outside of North Korea in a much wealthier country, Japan, because they had all these things with them. And even if their lives were very difficult because they were under this increased sense of surveillance, they still simply had a lot of nice stuff with them. And they also had relatives who sent them things from Japan. So what ended up happening is that a lot of them brought things with them to sell in North Korea, and they just had all this stuff that the general public didn't have access to. So I want to read this quote. I know you might have already read it, but I'd like to just read it out loud for emphasis. This is what another person that I interviewed, a guy without any sort of connection to the ethnic Korean community, a regular North Korean person who just simply happened to have a friend who had immigrated from Japan. So here's what he said. In the 1970s, when I went to my friend's house, I saw that they lived gloomy lives, but the things they used were all Japanese made. They'd walk around with their Seiko watches, and the quality of their clothes was also high. They were not ordinary clothes. If you think about it, for human beings, seeing something leads to wanting it. So figure of speech in Korean. So when you see things, you want them, and you see nice clothes, you want to wear them because of greed. So that's when greed quietly started to rise in North Korea. The image of Japan, the envy of the Japanese returnees, people derogatorily call them chepo as a term of disparagement. So this is very, very interesting to me that not only were they ideologically not trustworthy from the point of view of the government, but people in society overall looked down on them for being from Japan, but at the same time were envious of them for the different living standard that they were able to experience. They also brought money, cash, and foreign currency, which they could use in these special shops where you can buy goods in foreign currency in North Korea. And I believe that some of these stores were actually opened, or they were at least enlarged to meet the demand of these people from Japan who had foreign currency with them, and also was a way for the government to make money. And this is radical in a society where complete social equality is the main prevailing norm at the time. So I have a theory about how all this played out based on the anecdotal evidence that I've been able to gather. So on the one hand, and this is I don't know how I'm doing on time, but this is the last point I want to make. On the one hand, you have the central government and the leadership, Kim Il-sung and everyone around him, who wanted a propaganda victory, labor force increase, and they wanted factory equipment and technology that these immigrants sometimes brought with them. They simply didn't understand. I genuinely believe that they did not understand what a challenge it would be to integrate them. And what ended up happening is essentially that there are estimates that around 10% of this entire group were sent to labor camps. And others, again, were placed under this very strict form of surveillance. I don't know if you've read Aquariums of Pyongyang by Kang Chol-hwan, defector from North Korea. He is the child of 2 immigrants from Japan who were sent to labor camps. So he's one example of that. And there are a lot of reasons for why it happened that way. But one thing is they complained a lot. They complained about lifestyle in North Korea, and they were not used to the very strict censorship and very strict regulations on public speech that you have in North Korea, because they were used to being able to speak their minds freely in Japan. But on the other hand, even while the central government and the leadership wanted one thing, they wanted these people to come, the security services, and here's the pictures of agents from the state security department, they still had to do their job, and their job was to arrest and suppress people who did things like speak their mind publicly in a critical way about the government. So there was just no other way for this to play out. And they couldn't really, or chose not to be lenient towards these people, because they had a very, very clear task of keeping any type of critical speech against the government suppressed. So in retrospect, it seems like all of this was very much bound to happen. And of course, it is incredibly, incredibly tragic for this group of enthusiastic, often ideologically driven immigrants who, through no real fault of their own, ended up in a very difficult position in North Korea. Okay, thank you very much for giving me the time, and I apologize for the slight logistical issues, but times we live in and so on and so forth, and may we all next year be gathered for 2 dinners in Jerusalem or somewhere else in Israel. Or maybe in Seoul if the embassy will buy a ticket. Thank you.
Yeah. No need to apologize. It's a free trip around the campus.
You should be there from the beginning. You have such a strong voice. I can hear them. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay.
I'm fine. I know exactly what.
Okay. Can you? Okay.
I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay. They're kicking you out from this one as well. The last speaker of this panel, Einav, welcome. Orel, shalom. Yael, the floor is yours. 20 minutes.
Thank you. I would like to share.
Share. It's a socialist society. You can share whatever you want.
Here we are. Okay.
Oh. Okay.
And I want just to say something about the diet that you are thinking I'm going to do for all of you after 2 meals, Korean meals. Well, after Korean meals, we don't need any diet. It's a very good one. Before I started, I want to, I'm very exciting to be today because the last time I've been, it was 2 years ago. I just presented the research proposal ideas, and today we're going to share some of my first part of the research. Before I begin with the subject presentation, I would like to thank you, Alon and Ira, for all of this organization and operation, which was not easy this time. And of course, Korean Embassy for the platform. And to my 2 dear mentors, which are mentors to me, and for their support is Guy and Anat. And without it, probably I wouldn't be able to go so far with this dream. I want to share with you first my discovery that brought me to this research journey. As a dietitian in Students' Health Service in Health Minister, the question always arises is how to assimilate healthy eating habits among a young population. How will they improve their diet? Well, this question concerns many people in the Western country and not just there. This question has been asked because there's been significant changes in diet and eating habit in recent decades, and it was not very good. It harmed the health of the population, and one of the observed signs of this is increasing in obesity and overweight data rates. I was surprised to discover that obesity is very low in Korea compared to Western countries, for example, OECD countries. And another thing that I found out just in the beginning is that Korean daily diet, there were no significant changes in the dietary components or eating habits. Well, I probably could see eyebrows raising, but I want to show you something. On your left side, you can see a table from Joseon from the 19th century. And in your right side, you can see how the meal looks in schools in Korea. So as you can see, there were no big changes. So wherever I research for information, I found nations that proudly distribute the traditional food culture. The question I kept asking myself is how? How did they do it? How it works for them? So after formulating this question in research way, step by step, the research scheme was constructed. The basic assumption is that traditional diet and eating habit in Korean culture is healthy, and maintaining it will establish a healthy population and prevent obesity. Health promotion in school has been around all along. I found some documents on this from an early period from 1871 and a long time ago. I will not go there today, although it's very interesting. Since the 50s, there has been a regulation of hot meal at school, which led to legislative process in the 70s until the publication of the law in 1981, which was the first one. A change in health indices towards the end of the 80s, and it led to legislation to promote nutrition and healthy diet in schools, even before there was a significant change in obesity data among the young population. And as you can see, I hope that you can see that the line keeps straight till the 80s, and just then it starts to raise up. So go to my scheme. These changes lead the Korean they didn't have any change in obesity, but socioeconomic changes have led to change in food consumption. And of course, I won't be able to expand on that today, but this is something you're probably familiar with. These changes have led Korean government to change their focus on work, to encourage the preservation of traditional way of life, which means eating together, balanced meal made from local food, and encouraging nutrition conservation, which means what is on your plan. Some of this activity was accompanied by legislation that promote assimilation process in school. At the same time, the implementation of legislation was transferred to the district and cities, which is unique to Korea. The Korean government assumed that the various action it takes will reduce obesity and overweight, and for that we'll have to wait and see. Introductions. The part of the study deals with legislation, government regulation plans, and action taken in district and cities. I divided the legislation to 3 categories. First one, the one that was made in 80s when the primary law was feeding in schools. The second one that promote nutrition and eating habit in schools, and legislation that promote the culture of traditional nutrition as a tool for healthy promotion. This legislation, as we shall see shortly, is not exclusive to young population, but an entire chapter in the law is devoted to promote the issue in schools and among young populations, like activities of day centers or activities of children in the community. I want to go over the methodology. Since the study is based on multiple sources of information, reports, data on obesity, legislation, the regulation of analysis of action plans in district and schools, I use strongly array. The model for analysis I used was ecological, sociological. This is an accepted model in public health, and it helps to map the factors that affect person's health, which help build strategy for changes in country or society. It forms the basic for public health policy planning. Well, just a bit about the time that the primary law include the analysis are the 1981 School Meal Act, which I've already talked about. Afterward, legislation in 2006, Informant Meal Act. The main change actually with this one to the one that was published in 1981 was the implement of dietitian and nutrition teachers in country schools. Today, about 70% of schools employ, usually by government, a dietitian or nutrition teachers who deals with all aspects of food, nutrition education, and mediation of relevant information for students, staff, and parents at the school area. I think but the most significant law to promote a traditional food culture was the law for the support of the Entire Life Education Act, which is unique to Korea, and was published in 2009. The law deals directly with the connection between traditional nutrition and health and prevention of obesity. The law's Special Act of on Safety Control of Children's Entire Life entered into research because it's still with promoting the school area. This law seeks to address the promotion of area that will best promote healthy eating. For example, it increased green zone of 200 meters around the school. They've been trying to do something like that in other countries, but not by regulation. Another thing is forbidden of selling soft drinks at schools or drink containing caffeine or around the area in the green zone. They are not allowed to sell food with high calories value or low nutrition one. Just briefly, I want to go over that table that summarizes the principle of the law. One of the interesting things and also unique to Korea is legislation that is not exclusive to a single government ministry. More so, since 2009, each district has a government center and units that 3 government ministers are coordinate and operating together to accomplish the law. When I got the action plan analysis stage, I decided to pick area where the obesity data were particularly low. Analyzing obesity data has been challenging due to Korea's unique cutting point. The country definition of overweight and obesity are different from other countries in the West or even in Asia. Also, another thing that I figure out is that the body shape of the country's population changed. Korean become taller, and about 5 years ago, the growth curves were adjusted. Anyway, after analyzing the data from the site of Korean National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, I decided to collect plans and programs from 3 areas, as you can see, Daegu, Sejong, and Gyeonggigi, just to see the average of obesity in 2019. I can remark that the average obesity in Korea for that year was 11.1 in elementary schools, and Jeju Island was in the top with 16.5%. I won't go to details, but I want to share with you a part of the analyzing of the programs from these 3 areas. I think the one that was particularly unique is in Gyeonggigi. They coined the term of eco-friendly food, which was basically a renaming of traditional food culture. Traditional is defined as a healthy diet based on local food while preserving the value of nature. The new old designation is better market in ecological trend in Korea, and I think that that's one of the reasons that it works so good. In Daegu, which is the bigger metropolitan city with the lowest obesity rate, have a program called Garden Food in schools, which works really nice since 2017 and is remarkably, you can find research on that. It's really, really nice to see. Something to learn from. I want to share with you a partial conclusion. Preserving traditional eating happened in 2 levels in Korea. Regulation, top to down, which worked through legislation to promote nutrition that will improve the health of population. These actions are also done through the preservation of folklore in broad community activity, like supporting of food festivals, as we all know, visiting Korea and see that. And national social, bottom to top. Preserving traditional Korean food culture is an integral part of Korean society, and that's something we also know. So this is some of the reference for this presentation, and I thank you all for listening.
Yael, can you I can take? Okay. So we're back in the panel. Thank you very much. The floor is open. Well, we got almost 40 minutes. I won't ask many questions, but the floor is yours. Feel free to crucify whoever you want. Just kidding. Ask questions. Benjamin, you first. Are you allowed in this room?
I think I'm allowed to be on Zoom, yes. Thank you. Okay, thank you for very interesting presentations. I had questions on, a few questions to Shai and one for Yael. First, I find the idea of studying the famine as a way of looking at inter-Korean relations absolutely fascinating. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. I have one question about sort of the timeline, very broadly speaking, because North Korea, if I'm not misremembering, in 1988, I think, donated supplies to South Korea after the floods in South Korea. So arguably this sort of floods, natural disaster-related diplomacy goes back even further. So that maybe even increases the scope of what you're doing. The other thing is, I wonder if you looked at all on sort of the discussions in like the discourse in South Korea on inter-Korean relations and sort of economic assistance, because my understanding of the sunshine policy is that part of it is very much rooted in this idea of helping North Korea get to a similar economic level of South Korea in order for unification to happen one day, so to prepare for unification that way. So my sense is that there might be a pretty big impact also I mean, that can only happen if North Korea is a poor country in need of this assistance, which arguably that image was sort of more firmly established from the early 1990s and onwards than it was before. So I'd be curious to hear if you have any thoughts on that. Should I just do my question for Yael right away, or? Yeah. So my question is, I hope it's not too annoying to nitpick on the case choices, because I know it's a very simple thing to do when you're discussing someone's presentation. But I am curious about Sejong as a city, because I've only been there twice, but my best understanding is that it's mainly civil servants who live there, who tend to be more well-educated than the average of the population, potentially. And I wonder if education levels and nutrition might also have some impact one another, things like that. So, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, but can you just repeat your first question?
My first question is on the timeline of why, according to you, this history starts with the floods in North Korea and not with the floods in South Korea, where North Korea gave aid.
I don't know. I mean,
sorry. Let's gather the questions, and then you can answer all the questions at once. Any more questions? Okay, so I'll ask a few questions, and then we can start answering, and then we can gather a few more questions. You're writing your PhD dissertation. Is it an article dissertation?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's important to write the thesis, but the question is you have to be oriented according to the journal that you're writing. So the question would be, when you write your chapter or when you write your article, you have to think which journal would you send it. What I mean is that you focus more on theory or more on the cases themselves. So this will influence how you write this chapter or this article that you intend to send to. It depends on the journal. Would it be more IR, more Asian studies, political science, hunger studies, or whatever, or a Korean journal, pro-Korean journal, etc. Now, you're talking about the process, and the question is, how do you define the process? You said it's not a win-win situation, or it's not. Did you achieve or anything or not? So this is a second question. Now, for Ben, you show an interesting talk, but you show that the aliyah, the immigration from Japan to North Korea was continued for a few years. Now, some of them arrived to North Korea and found out that it's not Haaretz HaMuftachat, the state that they thought, they imagined in their dreams, that North Korea is the Eretz Chalav Dvash. But some of them told or talked or were able to communicate with people back home, or you might say that the North Korean propaganda was doing a wonderful job, that even if the people from North Korea told the guys in Japan, they didn't believe it, that the dream was not that true. Now, for Yael, 3 quick questions, and then Avia want to ask you a few questions. One, the influence Western food entering Korea. The more Korea become globalized, more westernized. Before the corona, if you would go to Myeongdong, you go to McDonald's, you go to other places, you see many Koreans are eating junk food. As Daphne Tzul told years ago that she taught a class about traditional Korean food, which is very important, and all her students after the class went to eat junk food. And she was the only one who was eating Korean food. As Benjamin said, he talked about Sejong City. I'm asking a question about a more global cities, such as Seoul or other international cities that you have many Westerners living there, and the food will differ according to the community living there. So do you see any differences between cities? And the last question, the language and the definition that you use with your patients in Israel, would it be the same definitions that is being used in Korea, or terms, or the criteria is totally different? The Korean BMI would be different than the Israeli BMI. Okay. Avia, you want to ask questions? You don't have to. If you want.
Yes, I do.
Okay. And then.
Okay, so I have two questions. One of mine for Yael was actually kind of a continuation of Alon, what you just asked, which was about kind of the dissonance between the idealized attention to Korean food as healthy and nutritious and split up and all these things, and the fact that when I was in Korea, what everybody ate was chicken. Like all the students, they're just eating chicken all day, and they would go out and eat. So I'm wondering, I mean, obviously your research focuses more on some of these policy elements, and it may be that this is just simply completely like outside of the scope, but I'm curious if you're addressing at all some of the kind of the continuations of how it interacts. And for Benjamin, also, this question may be a little bit outside of the scope, but I was curious if you had followed up on what is happening to the later generations of these Japanese Koreans who got to North Korea, because obviously physical items that are brought, after a while they wear out or are sold on the black market, or these physical symbols of separation vanish. In some cases, if the families were like, is there a tendency of the maybe second generations, is there a tendency of them to defect to South Korea? Is there anything about kind of what happened to the next generation of these people? So thank you. And thank everyone for really, really fascinating talk.
That's why we invited you. Park, Dr. Park.
Yes. Thank you so much for wonderful presentations. All a very, very fascinating topic. A lot today. Question to Shai. Is it okay to call first name? So my question is, why were you just first interested in famine disasters? I mean, if you try to interact with the inter-Korean relationships, then what just made you do that, the research? Not just way that, okay, so South Korea is helping North Korea, but I think that there must be some special kind of intriguing point for you. So that's my question. And for Benjamin, I have two questions. First is, I was wondering that when I hear that your example of that interviewee, did he share his experiences in North Korea and all that hardships to his families or his friends? I don't know what is kind of post his North Korean experience affecting his life in South Korea. Must be like a really mixed feeling. And another question is, you mentioned that when Korean immigrants to North Korea, they're mostly involved in Chonmyeon, right, in Japan. And I'm wondering, maybe that's kind of difficult to all the communications and all that, but how their responses and reacted to those hardships of those immigrants in North Korea, and how did that responded to it, and did they try to continue not mobilizing, kind of recruiting more Japanese, the Koreans living in Japan to sending to North Korea, or did they just abruptly stop that project? So this is my question. Lastly, a question to Yael. I think like obesity is also not just related to the food, like Western versus Korean food division. It's also related to class issue, because as we know, many of maybe other kind of societies also have issues with children's obesity related to poverty and the lack of nutrition. So are you also thinking about the factor in class in your research? And secondly, I want to know, I don't know, quite recently I just ran into South Korean news regarding one nutritionist working in high school. So she's really offering a lot of fancy food within also the good budget of her provision of food, but she just quit. So that was kind of national news too. So were you also interested in thinking about like workers, or not just like policymakers, like nutritionists and those who are involved in the process of provisioning like a school food? And second question is, you showed that like a picture of like a legislation process, like in historical perspective. I'm wondering that why there is a really kind of big gap, or almost like a void between 1981 to 2006. Do you think that's the kind of the lack of, like a recognition of importance of food to students by Korean government, or there are some other issues related? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for interesting questions. Now we can go to have lunch. Just kidding. Shai, you first, and then Benjamin.
Okay, so Benjamin, you asked me about the...
just like each one gets 7 minutes, so...
I'll keep it short. So Benjamin asked me about the North Korean aid to the South. You're right, it happened in 1984. I do address it. I'm not sure how I'm going to connect this to the South Korean aid to the North, but I do address this subject. And you asked me about the timeline, right? So I think I'm going to examine the South Korean aid until the President Lee Myung-bak, he ended the aid. I think it was in 2010. So I'm definitely going to look also about the sunshine policy and all the other presidents. Alon, you asked me about the where I'm going to publish it. Still not sure. I think that right now it's going to a more international relations. I think it's more of a theoretic paper that really fits international relations articles. And the last question is about why the famine. My first interest, my main interest is basically North Korea. And I wrote a paper about it during my BA studies. And I really think that you can also learn a lot about the famine itself by exploring the inter-Korean relations and the foreign aid that North Korea got during the famine. And that's it, I think. That's all the question.
As I said, it's important to know the journal. How do you write for this journal, not specific journal?
Yeah, I have a few ideas. Not quite sure. I'm only at the beginning, but I have a few ideas. Yeah.
אין בעיה, בהצלחה. Benjamin.
Hey, thank you very much. These are...
Take Aliyah to North Korea. Okay.
Yes, yeah. These are actually, it's, and I hope soon to have it edited in a dissertation and readable for all who wish to do so. So on the question of if they were able to tell people back home how things were, short answer is no. Communications were extremely limited from North Korea, and all letters were read by the authorities. So people developed this coded language in a way to say what they wanted to, but in different language. But it was very, very hard. And I mean, families weren't able to visit for the first 7 years, I believe. But eventually, it's fascinating how long it took for the rumors to spread back in the community in Japan about how things were in North Korea, because they couldn't communicate directly. But eventually, and a lot of people were in denial too. I mean, for decades, people were in denial about how the state of things in North Korean society. Yeah, it's very difficult. But
can I add one small question?
Yeah.
Do you see a parallel of how North Korean refugees see South Korea when they enter South Korea? They have the promised land, and they have...
For sure, because there too, the communication is so limited that North Korea is, again, I'm talking more about North Korea rather than the community in Japan, but one thing I've learned through interviews, not least, is that North Korea is the land of rumors, because communication is so limited that people go on very, very little information and extrapolate from that into like big truths that they know to be true, even though they don't have a lot of foundation for it. But yeah, absolutely. People do come to South Korea and expect that life will be much, much easier than it ends up being. So definitely. And sort of related to that, I want to address Dr. Park's question about Cheongmyeon. I think I mentioned them in my presentation, but the sort of general Korean Residents Association in Japan. There's two groups, Mindan and Cheongmyeon, and Mindan is much bigger today, but back in the 60s, Cheongmyeon was Mindan is closer to the South Korean government. And Cheongmyeon I find absolutely fascinating. It's also part of this chapter. I did spend a few days with representatives of Cheongmyeon last summer in Osaka. I should not have said the name of the city. Please censor this out of any recording. Don't forget this, because it's anonymous in my dissertation, and I feel very embarrassed now. But anyway, in a Japanese city, and to try to understand this, how did they process this information? And it's the generation of today is very, very different from the past. Like they know most things that we know about North Korea. I think they value that information slightly differently. Like they see the reasons for things being the way they were slightly differently than many do in the outside world. But a lot of people even today, a lot of people that I've spoken to are simply in denial that things turned out difficult for immigrants. I think part of the reason is that their relatives who they have in North Korea actually fared pretty well, because they tended to have better connections. Being high up in the Cheongmyeon in Japan would give you much, much better options and alternatives in North Korea. We call it proteksia, I believe, in Israel. So sort of family ties and things like that matter a great deal. But there has been no official response to as far as I'm aware, from Cheongmyeon to what ended up happening. And this, to segue into Dr. Park's second question about this person that I interviewed and his experiences, more than anything, he literally said that he wanted to go to Japan and fight people from Cheongmyeon, like physically harm them, because he was so angry at what they did to him, because he saw it as they deceived him, and they deceived thousands and thousands of others. And his anger is very, very understandable to me. He is a particularly interesting person. I actually happened to meet him by chance, because he was the partner of another person I was interviewing, and I was in her apartment, and then he was there, and I saw that he was reading in Japanese, so I got curious, and that's how we ended up talking. he was not on very close terms with his relatives in Japan. He was disappointed that he thought they'd become too Japanized, which, I mean, is very much the case with this generation of Japanese Koreans. And he didn't have it's very hard, like a lot of defectors have a family network in South Korea, or they have distant relatives, but he really didn't have anything of the sort. So it was very difficult. And he also, the identity issue is very, very interesting when it comes to this group, and also what one might argue Olim in Israel too. Like where is your actual home? Who do you identify with the closest and things like that. So there's a lot to talk about here, I think. And on the last question on Avia, your question it is a very, very good question. What happened with later generations? On the one hand, what ended up happening is that the relatives in Japan stopped sending as much stuff in general, both because of the economic crisis in Japan, but also because generational shifts, like people dying essentially, the people who, and family ties weakening for that reason. So yeah, these status symbols just aren't really important anymore. And especially during the famine in North Korea, a lot of people had a very hard time adapting to that because they lived off of stuff, again, that people sent them from Japan, but they just weren't very useful anymore when what you really need is rice and just food, but you can't really eat a Seiko wristwatch. But yeah, so that shift is very interesting. But what did end up, what I am curious about how the later generation fared socially, because some people I talked to who were descendants of Korean immigrants from Japan, they actually didn't do so terribly. Like someone, actually the person that I mentioned, who was the guy who first moved to North Korea and then defected, his daughter is still in North Korea, and she graduated from a fairly prestigious university. And she was married to someone who also did. And so I think there was, I don't know, it's a little unclear actually. I'd love to look into this more. Hopefully it's another project I can take on after the thesis is done. So, okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Benjamin, Yael.
Well, I hope you had so many questions to me is because you're interested in Korean's food and not for other reason. I'll start with Sejong was in this research because they have a unique system, as I shown in one of the notes that I've shown you before. It's a very small city, not just in Korean eyes, 200 and 400 people. And they have constructed centers for all the nutrition, school meal actions, and all the program together is in one center, which is very interesting. It's a very new city. They start publishing a number of obesity just since 2015. So it's unique, and they have a very nice numbers in my eyes. So that's why they've been chosen to be inside. About the Western influence in Korea, this is part of the reason why the government made this legislation, because otherwise you won't need that. And even so, I want to say, when I compare that Western food in Korea and Japan, I found out, for example, McDonald's, there's 300 more McDonald's shops in Japan than in South Korea. So, and I'm not speaking about China, which is much, much, much more. So Korea actually is not so fond with American beef, for example, and this is one of the reasons why you can't see so many McDonald's in Korea. Another thing is not just to look inside big cities and to go in other areas and to see the influence of Western food, and it's not that common. This is about this question. I know that when you are visiting in Seoul, you can see a lot of Western restaurants around you. but it doesn't mean that that's what Korean eat at home. And another thing is this actually school meal that they have, and which is focused on the traditional food. About the BMI that Alon was worried about it before, the cut point in South Korea is, I don't know if you're familiar with the BMI. BMI is an index that compare the weight to your height, and the scale goes in Israel or West countries between 20 and 25. It's okay, it's normal, it's what you want to achieve. And 25 to 30 is overweight, and we are compassionate, as you can see. And above 30, it's obesity. Well, in Korea, between 20 and 22 and a half, it's okay to be. And overweight is 22 and a half till 25. Over that is obesity, which means when you want to compare, when Koreans say obesity, I have to do some math analysis to understand what I'm speaking about. So I was lucky because when these numbers, this data been sent to abroad, like the OECD webs and collecting numbers, or WHO that does that, they already have to change the cut point. But I'm dealing with children, and we don't use BMI. We use diagrams, and they're just the last 2 years made the changes that it's look like similar to Western. We still have a gap between those. So it's challenging, even this simple thing to compare. About if I want to go to interview dietitian, of course I want. This is the second part of this research. I'm looking forward to go to interview and participate in schools meal. And this is the important part of this research, which I'm very, very, very exciting to go and do. I think that regulation, it's nice, and program is wonderful, but I want to see how does it really work. And this is the main thing in this research. Professor Park, you asked me about the gap about the laws in at the time, right? Well, part of it is because Korean was very busy with transfer the government at that time. And what I saw in a white paper, that it took some time to reorganization of all this minister to accomplish the law that was already written down and over the regulation. I can say they already have regulation for 2021, 2025, and even 2030. And I just can be green of jealousy that they can think so further about these issues and how to deal with. So I hope I answer you for your questions. I didn't forget anything, right?
We have regulation only for next week. We don't know what will happen. We still need regulation for the election, but we don't know when it will occur. Just to remind you, sorry, any more questions? Anyone? We're going to go to lunch. Yael, Avia, I need to speak to you for a sec, so please stay. We're going to lunch. Everyone has his lunch box. Feel free to eat Western food, Korean food, whatever kind of food you like. As I said, at 12:30, MA students, PhD students, but even if any one of you scholars want to join, Professor Ann We'll talk to the students about future research. And then we're going to be back at 1:30. This is the third link for the workshop. We will have another panel, and then we'll have the final panel, and we will do some thinking about what do we want to do in our next workshop. And thanks again for the support of the Korean Embassy. So see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.